ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome. Thank you for the lovely introductions, but I also want to introduce each of my panel members a bit more personally to have a personal aspect which you can use to start conversations after the awards. So Shalini here, music is a very important part of her life. She's been part of various forums on music and was involved in creating a program on the portrayal of Indian women in films, in Hindi films, through music. Apart from having traveled all continents on earth, yes, you heard it right, all continents, she's also an advisor to an NGO, Punk, which is into training people with disabilities and making them job worthy in the retail sector. Swati here. Swati is associated with the cause of senior living. She's part of an organization called Senior Living Solutions Private Limited, which helps senior citizens find properties within their budget and more around assisted living. She's also a part of an NGO called Sashaktikaran, which spreads awareness on government schemes for the benefit of caregivers, household caregivers and maids. Farhan here is an IAS officer coming from an academic background. Apart from his gold medal in mechanical engineering and a rank in UPSC, he was also involved with the Montreal Protocol on climate change. He's also a part of the Prime Minister's task force on digital and financial literacy, as well as on the Advisory Council on skill development. He also loves to travel. And last but not least, Shabir. He is associated with the Bill Clinton Climate Foundation and also teaches underprivileged children in schools. So that's the panel for you. Now, before we begin, so that the panel members can gauge the room, by show of hands, how many of you have their primary role in ESG and CSR in your respective organization? Just by a show of hands. Thank you. Now, how many of you are consultants on ESG and CSR?
Not many.
Not many. Perfect. Okay, so the topic for today is building resilience, how ESG and CSR strategies help organizations during uncertain times. It's a vast topic, but given the time that we have, I've picked up two themes. One is on the positive impact that these strategies can have on stakeholders' trust and their loyalty. And the other one is possible financial benefits out of these strategies. Along with this, we will also touch upon implementation challenges and building capacity. So let's dive straight into it. Shabir, if I can start with you. How can companies effectively communicate their ESG strategies to enhance stakeholder confidence?
Thank you. The ESG and other sustainability practices have gained a lot of traction in this country in the last 3 or 5 years, with companies moving on to the fact that they need to do the bit to lower global warming. Having said that, at K-Raja Corp, we started on this journey way back in 2006, 2007, when we signed a MOU with CAI, Green Building Council, to construct only green buildings in the country. So whether it's a green mall or a green hotel or a green office. Having said that, ESG, if I were to communicate or if a company needs to communicate, there's a lot more which needs to be done. One is obviously you need to put your ESG report in the public domain. Second, you need to ensure that the numbers which go in the ESG report, or for that matter in the sustainable report, are third-party assurance verified. Thirdly, attending such conferences and disseminating information is also part of the process. We also need to ensure that we don't do this on a year-to-year basis, but on a monthly and a quarterly basis, we upgrade our ESG report. We keep on adding what we are doing. We keep on throwing out challenges, what come in our way. So, for a company, when 2019 was the year when we actually did our first ESG report, when the first real estate developer in our country to have done that. Having said that, we moved on to this journey in terms of putting up the numbers in the public domain, which are third-party verified, audited and assured. So various ways to gain confidence of whether investors, customers, suppliers. Each company needs to do its own bit in their own way to ensure that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, let's talk about some of the internal stakeholders in company, and Chalini, this is for you. What role can employees play in supporting and driving sustainable initiatives within the organization? And how can the business foster the culture of sustainability among the entire workforce?
When you talk of culture, culture is a science and an art. You have to do both, right? So if I have to give an analogy, and if you look at to say, so what is culture? A lot of people ask me to say, what is culture? Let's look at a natural element, okay? We are all sitting here. We can all breathe air, but we can't see it, right? It exists. It is there, but we can't see it. Only if we feel closer to our nose, we feel that, yes, there is there. Culture is exactly like that in an organization. It exists. It is there. It is practiced. It is literally breathed day in, day out, but we can't see it. We can only feel it. When you say building culture for ESG, which is all three put together, which is your sustainability, social responsibility, and corporate governance, all three, these are three very difficult. It's no different from building culture otherwise. Whatever that you have to build culture in, it's exactly the same. So what is it? It has an external piece and it has an internal piece. So whenever you have to build on these three aspects, I think the first thing that somebody needs to do is just go externally and engage and listen. Very important. All stakeholders, be it regulators, suppliers, communities that we serve, customers that we are with, regulators, everybody, meet and understand from them what is happening. Where is it that you can find that one little thing that you can do which will give you that competitive advantage? It's not just me too, it's not just copy to say, okay, I have to do sustainability, so it's carbon emissions because everybody else is doing it. Or I will change my product, slightly tweak it here and there. No, that's, ticking the box. That's just window dressing. You don't want to do that. You want to find as to what is it that you should do. So engaging and talking to people and listening to them would help you understand, because you know your company well. So from there, you can then tie up to say, what is the need? What are the changes that are happening? And pick up that. Once you've done that, then you have to bring purpose to it. It has to align with your purpose for what you are, with the strategy, with the operations, your day-to-day. And like Mr. Rathi said, then metrics is important. Once you have that, but before that, you also need to have certain set of policies. When I say policies, I don't mean, you pick them up from the regulator's website and copy them and put them on yours. That's not what I mean. What I mean is simple documents which your employees can understand, which shows what is your commitment, what are the actions that they have to take so that they can do that, right? Then you've got to build it into their performance, to operations. When you build it into operations, that means there will be resources that would need to be provided. If you don't give them resources, there's no way they can do anything with it. So resource allocation is important, measurement is important, training them is important, continuous communication with them is important. So that all you have to do internal. Reward is important, recognition is important. If you don't tell them what they're doing is right or not, then they may be doing something wrong and that will become the culture. That is not what you want. So this whole piece you have to do with employees, get their engagement in. But that's not where it ends. You again need to look at to say, how do you now improve? How do you innovate? How do you research? And if you've taken it to one level, how do you ensure that you come up now with better sustainable products or services, something new that you can add on to that? And while you're doing that, you again have to go back to the external, because it's something that you have to deal both. And that you have to go with your suppliers. You've got to look at your other stakeholders to say, are the practices that what you are saying, are your employees able to work with them to get it? Because if they're dependent on external and they're not able to get that support, there is no way they would be able to function. So how do you take it with your suppliers? How do you take it with your vendors? How do you ensure you go back to the communities and look at to say, how is the community benefiting? The purpose that you had set out to achieve, is it moving slowly and steadily? That's what you have to see, and that's where culture builds. It's a long process. It doesn't happen overnight.
That's so true. In fact, what I see a lot of companies do is they organize these beach cleaning drive or something which is a very short introduction to what this thing is. But as you mentioned, it is about the entire experience of the employee throughout the organization and how they portray themselves outside the organization as well. That's so true. Swati, if I may come to you, from an external perspective, how do you assess and measure the actual impact of ESG and CSR implemented by organizations? So what are the matrices that you look at, and what do you find the most valuable in evaluating the effectiveness?
Right. So let me start with, I'm the consultant also in the house, so you asked that question. So, from a perspective of standards, let me start by saying that end of the day, look, ESG or CSR has to be treated as a requirement, as a inbuilt thing, as a culture, or it's a natural. The moment it becomes compliance, then then you're doing something from outside, or somebody's imposing upon it. So with that context, let's say, in terms of the reporting metrics, has to be in a way decided by the organizations themselves. So they set their goals, they said to have to set their vision, then they set their goals, and like Shalini said, set their metrics and the measurement, etc. But end of the day, look, from external point of view, how do you assess one company versus another? So therefore, you do have to fall back as to some standards and globally accepted standards. And different geographies have different standards, but most common being used are the GRI, TCFD, and recently IFRS also came out with S1 and S2, which are essentially the sustainability-related financial reporting parameters. Indian regulator has been actually way ahead in some of these things, and we've had the BRSR. I'm sure a lot of companies here would have, or people representing the companies here would have gone through the BRSR reporting, which became mandatory from this year, the top 1,000 companies. So these are the reporting standards, and if I take up, let's say, an the critical metrics as a agency which assesses, we would tend to look at, in E it's pretty simple, it's very measurable. You look at the emissions, you look at scope 1, 2, 3, you look at water, waste, you look at how your energy intensity is, the percentage from non-fossil fuel. But more important is when you assess them, you have to really look at what the vision is out there. Just mere numbers don't really take you anywhere. You actually have to say that, okay, fine, from here, where are you going? So do you really have gone ahead? Like certain organizations have actually, for example, a Walmart has internationally said, they would take entire energy from renewable energy. 100% of the energy would be renewable energy. So have you given a clear roadmap? That's been the measurement, and the intention is clearly articulated to the investors at large. On the S side, actually, it's very important is obviously the gender, pay, diversity. Now, diversity, typically, if you look at it, we tend to say a male and a female. Is that really what diversity is all about? Absolutely no. It talks about different, religions, cultures, color, for that matter, even, including the third gender. And I must share, it was a very nice conversation, some time back I had with a large company, which is a beverage company, also supplying to international markets. And they said that they were driven by including this, and therefore they actually went ahead and did a lot of expenditure at the plant to include the third gender facilities. Now that's taking it to another level, So they said, we are not just doing lip service. or just taking the tick box check. We were actually going beyond that and really seeing that how we can. And it was such a good experience. They shared that how it was such a good experience, and the whole workers in the plant, one day they were skeptical, and the next day the whole thing was so well assimilated that they immediately, the HR had another target that 5% of the workforce say. And look at what they're doing to the society at large. You're giving an avenue. You're giving a very good avenue to the marginalized community, if I may say. On the governance side, of course, the most, while our chief guest also outlined a lot of stuff, I think it's very important that, clearly the board, and Shalini, of course, here is our independent director, so, very clearly, does the board have the requisite experience? It becomes a very critical point from an assessment perspective. And also, does the board have a clear strategy in terms of, what they are going to monitor? And monitor it in the true sense, and therefore build it in your various enterprise risk managements, or for that matter, in your CSG, ESG subcommittee, or for that matter, actually see whether the management, are you building it as part of the management performance pay? That will take it to another level. So, in a nutshell, instead of we as an assessment agency, it's very easy to say, okay, just see, what you have done. But we try to look for what companies have done in terms of best practices and taken it beyond what was minimum required, number one. Number two is, I will also say that, if you do not have the intent, how much you want compliance to be done and how much the regulator can force it. If the companies don't want to do it, they will not do it, or they will just do an eye wash. So I think the intent is the most important thing. Yeah, thanks.
That's wonderful. Farhan, if I can come to you now, in your experience, what are some of the effective strategies that organizations have to implement the ESG and CSR policies, especially during the challenging times? And how can the businesses align themselves with the government policies to drive such sustainable policies?
That's a very challenging question.
It is 2 in 1. So yeah.
So I can give some examples, and most of my examples would be global. So pardon me, because I think ESG has been a subject that has been there out there in the world. In India, we're still grappling with many of the metrics and reporting. So as Swati mentioned, Walmart, they have partnered with the US EPA. And a lot of that is their commitment to reduce greenhouse emissions. One of them was also using renewable energy. Now, a lot of organizations do that, and now once the organization at a higher level decides, the question is, how does that get implemented on the ground? What Walmart has done is all its stores have been in line with the US climate goals. Now that's a huge commitment from a global perspective. Similarly, organizations like Nestle, they have partnered with the UK government, and they are looking at partnering on environment, food and rural affairs to improve packaging, which has always been a concern. We know what they've gone through in India. So that's, every organization, I guess, learns and then brings it within their organization and the culture. So I think, as Shalini mentioned, that's something not seen, but it kind of remains very much in the DNA of that organization. I can give example of Apple. They have, for example, partnered with the EU policymakers, particularly on e-waste. Now that's a huge thing. We still have to see a lot of those, issues in India. Unilever, this is an example in India. They have partnered with the Indian government, and they're working extensively on the Swachh Bharat initiative. So a lot of these organizations have partnered either with the government or the regulators. And I think Novartis on the other side, they have on the healthcare, they've been working with the UK government on sustainable drug and making it affordable. So I think there are a lot of examples to see globally. Indian companies are slowly getting there. I know we still have a long way to go on that.
No, absolutely.
Can I add
Yes,
one?
please.
While you were talking, Farhan, I remembered one. And one of you would have to help me with the name of the company. I can't remember. But it's a very simple thought, and I thought, what a brilliant thing that they did. So there's this international shoe company that for every sale of a shoe, one pair of shoes given to somebody who doesn't own one.
So,
Is it John? Isn't it Tom? Tom's or something like that? I can't remember the name. But I just thought, what a simple idea. But it helps, create a purpose.
Yeah.
It helps align everybody, and it gives them a huge brand reputation.
Absolutely. I mean, these are things that can be easily done,
Yeah.
and you just get so much, I won't say mileage, but the stakeholder confidence.
Yeah.
I think that's something that is important, especially in uncertain times. Shabir, back to you. As a Chief Sustainability Officer, you most likely encountered several challenges in implementing ESG, CSR type policies. Could you share some common hurdles that companies may face and how to overcome some of those?
So, real estate has always been lagging in doing this, but I guess this time it's a manufacturing company or a real estate company, they have worked on this new ESG, which is a platform which everybody is now looking at. Having said that, the challenges obviously is in terms of educating your staff, educating the workmen at site, educating your suppliers, educating the... So what we have done is, along with HR, we have an elaborate framework of where we have KPIs for each of our employees. And it is compulsory for each of our employees down the line to have a minimum of one KPI as far as ESG is concerned. We have monitoring teams which you go to the site which look at that. So one is obviously the flow of information which comes from various departments and which goes into an ESG report and sustainable report. The validity of that information, needs to be checked and cross-checked. So the challenge was there. So how we overcome that was we got a third-party auditor to actually look at each and every number which goes into my ESG report and which is put into the public domain of my website, and which ensures that that person goes and audits, and if there's the next person who says that there has been a zero accident at site, it is mandatory for the external auditor to go and check the records, for the last 5 years and find out, talk to the workmen, and then kind of ratify that, okay, there is assurance in that number, and that number goes out in the public domain. This is an evolving, process for companies across the world. I guess Europe and other countries have come out with laws where there would be severe penalties on companies who are actually greenwashing, right? The same was the case when we started with, the green buildings in our country when we started that in 2006, and now there are billions and billions of square feet of green buildings in the country. So the regularization of the process is being done by the government. The government of India has committed 2017 net zero in the Paris Agreement. So the intent of the government is there in terms of ensuring that all types of companies move towards that, because it is actually the companies and the buildings which actually are responsible for more than 42% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world, which have to move forward. So whether it's an existing building which needs to be made sustainable, whether it is a new building which has to be made as a green building, because with India having to look at a certain GDP growth, there is going to be a lot of construction happening in India. So as a company, we decided in 2006, why not we make buildings which save power and we use less power from a coal-based power plant? Why not make a building which saves water? What we call as passive architecture and active engineering, sewage treatment plants, low water faucet taps, recycling of water. So water obviously in our country is as scarce as power is. So we do our bit in lowering global warming. Having said that, the challenges are multifold for various companies, whether it's an infrastructure company, whether it is a real estate company, whether manufacturing is more organized because everything is in one particular plant and it is located at one location. For a real estate developer like ours, we are actually building a new product in different parts of the country, and each building is not the same. There are more than almost 150 suppliers for each building. We have to train them. We work with steel suppliers, we have worked with cement suppliers, and lighten suppliers like Tata Steel, JSW Cement are doing their bit in ensuring that they work towards a net zero. So the entire part of, when you talk of governance, when you're a listed company, obviously you have certain processes in place. The board has got trained extensively on ESG. The first point on the agenda for a board meeting is now, ESG compliance. SEBI looks at ESG very, very critically in terms of how each of the companies, listed companies have actually implemented, what they have said. So I guess this is the beginning for the companies in India to do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Shalini, you touched upon the culture part and what the culture should be. But from your experience, how can a board work collaboratively with the leadership to ensure that these ESG, CSR principles become an integral part of the company's value and behavior?
So, Sarvesh, if you look at, this is the most challenging period for a board director. Because if you look at in the last recent 50 years, the kind of disruption that we are seeing has never happened. If you look at it, whether it is technological disruption, whether it is climate change related, whether it is pandemics that come, whether it is supply chain issues that are there, then there is terrorism that is there, the whole trade agreements are being re-looked at, geopolitical scene is changing, we don't know who are the major powers going to be in the future, regulations change continuously, different country trade agreements are changing continuously, so there is huge transformation that organizations are going on. And as a board director, it can be very challenging. But at the same time, it is a big opportunity. It is an opportunity if the board directors can truly contribute. So how do they do that? I think the first piece that they have to do is, as a board, is introspection. Introspection to look at and say that what are we looking at this company for? What is the legacy that we want to leave behind with this company? I think second thing that they need to look at is, as a board, to say, how do we operate? Are we more backward thinking? We are just looking at past data, quarter and quarter results. Or are we forward thinking? Are we looking at to say, okay, these results are important, profitability is important, but what is it it's going to be in the next 10 years, next 5 years? Are we doing that? We also need to really sit down and think and say, are we going to, do we have the energy to spend the time to think through and say that these are going to be very difficult decisions that would have to be made? Because there is, when you are changing, and if the company is very large, it's more complex. So when you have to transform that company, it requires a lot of serious thinking to be able to do that. So first, we have to do that introspection ourselves. Once we've done that, I think as a board, the first most critical thing that is required is, do we have the right skill set? Because if we don't have a board composition that can really guide you, then you're just taking the word of the management and whatever they say, and you say yes and you go. Right? That's not what you want to do. So board composition is something that you have to look at. Then you've got to look at and see to say, how do you ensure that you give that time which is required, because with the changes that are going to happen, business models will change. You've got to live through that, right? So you've got to spend that time. Would you do that? Would you ask those questions? Would you nudge the leadership where it is required? Would you handhold them where it is required? Because many things are new to them as well. They haven't experienced it as well. They're navigating in the dark. They need hand-holding. They need somebody to be able to talk to, right? So provide all that. I would just say that any kind of activity that board directors are doing right now truly requires character, competence, and courage. And more than that, resilience to follow and see through the choices that you've made, what would be the outcomes of those choices. So I think that's where the board members would play a role.
Absolutely. I thought only my life as an auditor is becoming more difficult, but I do empathize with what you are going through as a board member.
You get heavily paid for it. We don't even do that.
But Shalini, I have a view. What about directors who are on board for like 20 years, 30 years? I mean, and you know that.
Thankfully, it's now 10 years.
I know.
Regulations have changed.
I know.
I was recently reading, I think there's about nearly a need for about 3,000, if I remember correctly, right? Yeah. 3,000 odd directors that are required because of all these directors that were either family members who had been put in there, or they were friends and family, who've been there forever, or they've crossed their threshold of 70 years of age, and they need to move on. So there is, I think, the government and the regulatory authorities are doing their bit to bring in that competence that I spoke of, that, it's not true professionalism even in the board positions.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And of course, then the diversity there, which is very important. Some of us wouldn't have never gotten an opportunity had that, regulation not come. And I can very proudly say that, when you have a diverse, and when I say diverse, I just don't mean gender, I mean genuinely skill set diverse as well. When you have that, the conversations are very, very enriching for everybody there. And that's when organizations are able to benefit from it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to move quickly now. I have two more questions, after which I will open the floor to the audience, so please start noting down your questions. This one is Shabir for you, and then Farhan, I want you to chip in.
Sure.
From a financial benefits perspective, what are the potential financial benefits and cost savings that you see being derived from long-term ESG strategies, if you have some examples or thoughts around that?
So if you look at financial savings, to begin with, obviously, there is a cost. I mean, the same thing when we did the E part of green buildings, we spent around 18% more for green buildings way back in 2006, 2007. So following this journey, obviously, we have the single largest footprint of sustainable buildings in this country, and we were felicitated by the President of India, for Dr. Abdul Kalam, for having that. Our testimony of almost 58 awards till date for sustainability show that we have done our bit in terms of walking the talk, and we've been audited and visited by numerous agencies, whether it is Prince Charles, when he visited India, he visited our labor camp at a South Mumbai project, Viveria, where he was visibly impressed with the facilities which we had provided to the people, which is way beyond what other developers would have done. Or whether we worked with the Bill Clinton Climate Foundation, where we worked on a performance contracting model to ensure that the actual energy gets saved for our Inorbit Mall, or the Westin Hotel at Powai, or the resort at Malad. The whole framework of ESG, sustainability, carbon neutrality, DJSI, they all talk about the same thing. And, they talk about environment, they talk about social, they talk about governance. The social part, obviously, we've done a lot of work quietly in the last so many years, whether you look at the SL Raja Hospital in Mumbai, or whether we quickly built a COVID hospital in Hyderabad, or the Durgam Cheru Lake. If you guys have been to Hyderabad, they're totally rejuvenated from us. Or we look at children from the slums. We look at organic farming. We look at if you come to our IT parks, a majority of them, have cycles. We have got EV vehicles. We are the only real estate company as Mindspace Business REIT to commit to the climate group for EV 100, which is electric vehicle 100, renewable energy 100. We have said that we will go 100% renewable energy by a certain period. We are the only company to have our own power distribution company 10 years back, where we supply green power to all our clients in terms of the IT companies which we have in our park. We have enlightened companies like Accenture, where the CEO, Julie Sweet, had made a commitment 2 years back that if the landlords don't give you 100% green power, please get out of that facility. It does not matter what rent. And companies are paying more, right? Like if you want green power in your home in Mumbai, you have to pay 86 paisa per unit more. Any one of us can do that. So,
Shabbir, if I can, sorry, I'd be happy to hear more on financial tax incentives. Any thoughts? I know KRIJ is one of the best company in the world, so we know that. But I think the question really Sarvesh is looking at is tax and financial benefits and incentives.
So the financial impact is still going to take a while in terms of what we get. And it's something, it's not something which as a company we did that, right? For financial impact. It's something which is going to evolve.
Yeah.
And once customers understand that, nobody actually pays a premium in this country for a ESG certified building, or for that matter, for a green home or a green office. So my CFO understands that, and we have set up a budget. We are also sponsoring projects in IIT Mumbai, where we're looking at seeing how we can look at climate change, how we can look at risk mitigation, how we look at Mumbai flooding, there is a cost right now, right?
That's
long term.
We'll have to see how
We'll have to wait and see.
I'm seeing a changing trend. It's slow, but I'm seeing that change. A lot of investors are looking at either green funds, or they're looking at where there are strong ESG policies and initiatives that organizations are taking. There are more investors that have patient capital that they want to deploy there, which means that your cost of capital would go down because you have more access to capital. So there are these financial benefits which may not be direct, like it's not like a tax incentive, but it does help in your valuation of a company as your cost of capital goes down.
And in fact, I'll add to it, because we were from that area. You're very right. There is a lot of screening that's happening. So number one, if you look at pre-investment, post-investment, so there's a lot of screening that's happening for ESG, number one. Number two, there are banks, and yesterday itself, I think on LinkedIn I saw IndusInd Bank's book your products for ESG related, in which they're offering concessional or they're giving slight concessions. RBI has allowed green deposits by banks, and therefore that money has to go for financing green projects. So there is a direct correlation. So while you may not have a very direct right now, but it's moving towards that. But there's obviously a negative side. So if you're not ESG, you're not moving in the direction, you don't have a clear strategy, you don't have a clear outgo out there, you're definitely out of the list.
It's almost penal.
Yeah, it's penalized, number one. Number two is, irrespective of all this also, and like the chief guest also spoke about it, I think, look, if you're, little things like, we discussed the brand recall. Now your employee well-being or your employee turnover rates reduce. Look at the productivity which happens. So it automatically does translate to your bottom line, whether or not, there are external incentives. External incentives. The internal incentives itself justify the cost of usage. Absolutely. Look at your products. Your kids, our kids. Any day they'll pay more for a sustainable, product. We may still hesitate, but our kids will always pay that premium. So, it translates. There is direct linkages that way.
No, absolutely.
So if you allow me, in terms of, we did a green bond recently with around $5 million. So if you look at the interest rate, that you don't get a rebate in interest rate. If you go to IFC and you pick up, it's still, so it's, if you were to ask me as a real estate developer, have I actually got money, have I picked up money at a less interest rate? No, I wouldn't say yes to that. But I guess, when we did the green bonds, or when we were the first ones to go to IFC and pick up funds for our hotels. So one is obviously the intent of the company when we started in 2006 was that, you know, we have to construct buildings, but we might as well do it in a sustainable way.
Sure.
So cost is
No, absolutely.
was secondary to begin.
Also, Shibi, just to be a devil's advocate, right? If you didn't have that, would an IFC even given you money?
That's
No, IFC.
God knows what reputation of an investor you would have had.
Differently. Even if you don't have sustainable buildings, IFC would then want you to work towards that. So existing building needs to be made sustainable. They have an edge system, and then you can do that. But that process is probably longer.
I think it's evolving.
Yes.
And I think it is moving
So,
in that right direction.
so like a builder, maybe a builder who's not A grade, or who's not top of the class, or who picks up finance at 11%, 12% in the market, 13%. If he's going to get it at 8.5%, 9% from IFC, then obviously he's going to save money there.
Absolutely. Farhan, if you can just touch very briefly on the tax aspect, because you brought it up,
Yeah.
that will be helpful.
So from a policy making and regulation, since I've kind of been on government as well as on the corporate side, I think there are three main things we're really looking at from a government perspective. One, they're looking at mandating expertise on board. And I think Shalini brought that up. Clearly, we have disclosure norms in terms of, you know, experts on the board, and the government is heading in that direction. We're also, you know, mandating committees. We all know the BRSR rules, and now they've been mandated for 1,000 listed companies. So, and the third one, which is the most critical, and I think that's something all panelists have brought up, is the disclosures.
Yes.
You know, whether you get a third-party audit. I mean, in Singapore, you get a 250% tax benefit if you have a third-party, you know, assurance. We're moving in that direction. I guess we still have, as we're moving from a $3 trillion to a $5 trillion economy, I'm sure a lot of these things would come in from the regulator perspective.
Yeah. And since you touched on the disclosures, my last question, Swati, to you. How reliable are these disclosures? Do you see that, I mean, can you share some examples where these disclosures are actually misleading?
Okay, so reliability, I mean, then it all comes back to the governance. You know, how good is the governance board to ensure that the data that is going out is reliable. But having said that, like Farhan mentioned, I think third-party assurance is the way to really give confidence to the outside world, whether they are your investors or various other stakeholders, in terms of how the reliability as well as the monitoring of that data. In terms of instances, it's not fair to kind of name some companies, but let me just make some roundabout references. Volkswagen, we know, is a clear example. I mean, I can take that name because some of these are global names. Volkswagen, they were fined because they made that claim that the software was, the cars were actually reducing or had a lower emission, and then they were figured out that the software was cheated or was altered, and the kind of losses that the investors went through was like something like 45 billion in 2 months or something. So look at the huge cost that you have to pay. Another example is, of course, Meta, data privacy issues. There's so much of, flack that they have faced. In the Indian context, I'll say that, sometimes what happens is, companies will try to say that, will disclose only the good part, but they'll not disclose where they've gone or they haven't achieved that much. Now, everybody appreciates that this is a journey, and therefore, while if you're disclosing or you're making or you're tom-toying, the good side, at least wherever you've not been, you've lagged behind or you've not been able to achieve, that should be there. There are ways in which companies have said that they've reduced their carbon emissions, but essentially they haven't even measured the carbon emission under scope 3, which is what their products have created. So. That's in a way misleading. They haven't even looked at or they haven't even seen that this, supply chains have been sustainable. Another area where we see corporates, Indian corporates play around is in the CSR, the CSR, there are a lot of instances or you could say so-called, how the CSR funds are then routed back or go into various other aspects which may really not be intended in the original purpose. Or for that matter, companies claiming huge claims about carbon and reduction of carbon, and next thing you know, the entire families of families or even the dog is traveling separately in a jet to some location. So, yeah, you've got to walk the talk. End of the day,
Yeah,
and the investors do look at it.
I'm kind of reminded CSR since you brought this up. I remember when our Prime Minister took oath, Swachh Bharat, every PSU put in thousands of crores building toilets across India. Today, nobody talks about those toilets, whether they are operational or not. I think CSR is something we really need to see sustainability on those, because it's not about doing something to please somebody or really. And again, since you brought this up on Volkswagen, I mean, I know a lot of Indian companies who have issues. The minute they bring this up, the first thing that happens, stock market, the share price tanks. Right? The next day morning you get up, your price is down 10%, you hit the lower end of the market. Now the problem, that's where how many companies can really bite that bullet.
Yeah.
I think that's the real leadership, which I think comes again back to your culture. I think we have enough examples to talk about.
That's why I said character, competence,
Absolutely.
courage.
Absolutely.
All three are important.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We are already over time, but I will have a few questions from the audience. If you can keep your questions short, please stand up, ask the question, and please also indicate which panel member you would like to. Yes, please, here.
My name is Sandesh. Mutual fund industry increased by 33%. But जिन्होंने मार्केट बढ़ा है, जैसे फाइनेंशियल इंडिविजुअल, तो उनके लिए गवर्नमेंट कुछ नहीं कर रही है. मीन्स जस्ट वाईफाई फैसिलिटी भी नहीं है उनके लिए.
Sorry, your question is on
financial. What's the question?
जो मार्केट बढ़ा रहे हैं, तो उनके लिए कुछ आप कंट्रीब्यूशन करना चाहिए.
Okay, that's a suggestion, is what you're saying for the government as such. I think there is going to be the BRSR norms, and once they come in, there are certain funds that need to be allocated to such companies, and that will flow through the mutual funds as well. I would think so.
I can tell you there are three things the government is mulling, and you'll probably hear that in due course. One of them is they're looking at tax incentives, clearly, for the companies that are ESG compliant. Again, from a metrics perspective, they're looking at the UK model and also the Singapore model where they have 250% tax. Similarly, we're looking at subsidized financing, which is also going to be for those companies that are really supporting the ESG. And I think the third one is procurement. Government does a lot of procurement, and I think they're trying to make ESG compliance. If the contractors are ESG compliant, they will be able to bid for those projects. So a lot of that is in the pipeline.
Sure. Sorry, there's one back there. I'll come to you.
Hi, I'm Kunal Gaurav, and I would like to thank you for such an insightful discussion on the ESG and CSR. I have two questions over here. My question number one is, when I was listening to all the panelists, when Shalini said that there are a lot of training that is required for employees, for stakeholders such as suppliers, etc. Whereas Sabir also mentioned that consumers do not appreciate the ESG initiatives that have been taken. Now, what is happening, just wanted to understand here, is that ESG implementations when are being done, the communities and tribes appreciate that who are getting impacted by those initiatives. But larger society, is not really appreciating it right now. Is it because of what I feel that, ESG is too inward-centric, and whereas we need to change it and look at from outward to inward? wherein we need to see larger society, and then we need to decide that what is the ESG strategy that we need to build. Sure. Is it something that companies need to do?
Yeah.
And second question is that, the ownership of ESG, where does it lies, It lies with board, it lies with CEO, or the company should bring somebody who is equivalent to CEO and have that much of power within this organization to drive the ESG strategies.
So on the first one that you said, while I agree that at present, at least in the developing world, in our country, a normal consumer is not willing to pay additional for anything that is being done sustainably or with ESG in mind. Agreed on that. But the conversations are starting. Look at your homes. Each day when the television is switched on and then you hear about floods there and drought in the other end, the first thing that everybody says is to say, ये climate change के लिए कुछ तो करना पड़ेगा. नहीं तो हमारे बच्चों के लिए तो ये पृथ्वी बचेगी नहीं. You hear those conversations in the home, right? When that starts, that's the first step. Then comes the next step where in the developed world now, where they have the resources, people are ready to pay. Even in India, the ones that are at the higher segment of income are looking at the younger generation, like Swati mentioned. They are looking at, and our children are ready to pay that little extra to say that, no, this is sustainably developed, or this is benefiting a group of women somewhere, or this is helping a tribe somewhere, or this is helping animals in, they also own an equal part on this earth. So there is that thought process which is beginning, and I think with social media and with awareness which is happening, it's a matter of time when people would be willing to shell out that little extra as well for what they are going to buy. The first one. Second, anyone else wants to take the second one?
I think I've answered.
No? Okay. I know we are putting a lot of onus on the CEO, but if you want to become a leader and you want to take that position and you want the power and the privileges with it, I think you should also own up the responsibility and the accountability. If you get somebody else, it doesn't work because the power is what will drive it. Yes, you can get an expert to help the CEO understand the nuances, understand the technical, things that need to be done, because the CEO is not fully competent on every little aspect of your operation. So I will give you an example. I sit on the board of Borosil Renewables. We were looking at the whole ESG piece, so we said, how do we go about it? The first thing we did is we tied up with one of the big fours as a consultant and got them. They met us as the board members. They met the senior teams. Then they sat down with each function head. They sat down and looked at operations and where all could, first level tweak could be done. It was put into a framework with a tiered structure. First 6 months, 1 year, 18 months, 24 months, 3 years, like that. There is a structure to say, from here, this is where today we are, and this is our desired state. So each function did that. Then they sat down as a team of senior executives to look at cross-pollination of those ideas, to say how would they. The whole matrix has been put in, which is presented to the ESG committee of the board on a quarterly basis. It's tracked, and then the chairperson of the ESG committee takes it to the board and showcases to say, how is it moving? That's how change will happen, and I think that's the way to go about it. Did we take it away from the CEO? No. It's still the CEO who's responsible for it, but with assistance and help.
He has to create those enablers. Yes. Yeah, sure. Sorry, last question from you, please.
No, so it's so I was just generally observing that quite a few of the aspects around ESG are largely, for lack of better word, in a piecemeal fashion. So when Farhan gave that example of how through Swachh Bharat it actually led to your toilets, and then today we do not know how relevant they are, whether they are being used or not. But if you see from a board perspective, of course you all know, so if you look at, let's say, something like a DuPont ratio, right? So return on equity is, return on sales is into your asset turnover is into leverage So everything comes within which, in the sense that it's all impacted. Now, if you, let's say, use a framework like balance scorecard, so point I'm trying to drive is if we introduce the KPIs and tie it down to the company's, let's say fundamentals, right? Finance, internal process, customers, organization learning, HR aspects. So why not, look at ESG from that angle, right? So today, if you take another example, which is finance.
Yeah,
If you look at
just come to the question, please.
yeah, so point is that if we link ESG efforts to the actual, let's say, EBITDA improvement, so then you can actually tie it down to some components.
Sure.
So why, maybe I could be wrong, but why don't we see that attempt at the board level, right? So why are we looking at more like a fringe aspect, that some philanthropy or charitable aspect, but not the...
No, I think you misunderstood.
Yeah.
Because I think from the beginning we said that it has to be integrated into, first of all, the purpose of the organization. Why do you exist? Then into your mission, then into your strategy, then into your operations. So it's not something which is on the sidelines. No, it is not. It is integrated. Will it impact profitability immediately? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe initially even a little negatively because some more resources would need to be deployed. But in the long run, yes, that's where it has to head. Because if there is no profitability, there's no sustainability. Finally, organizations have to run and make profit, right? They have to do that as well. So it's very, very integral part of it. It's not something on the sidelines. Maybe you misunderstood. Or maybe we didn't clarify it properly.
Very true. It's not just the profit. I mean, it's complete shareholder value and stakeholder value for that. I mean, if you don't integrate it, you don't have a business 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line. I mean, how have organizations have to build it. It's embedded as part of your enterprise risk management. And it has to be. That's the way it has to function.
But that's the point. So I actually sit with a lot of these committees in my role, and I've seen the seriousness with which this gets discussed at all these well-governed companies. The point that Farhan was making was more around people having spent that money because the Prime Minister made the call and then not following up. But a lot of the well-governed companies are really following up on the promises that they made.
I can give you an example. In 2016, when Unilever was setting up a state-of-art factory in Pune. Now, coming to your KPIs and balance scorecard, I mean, it's very difficult. So what they really looked at is they did an ESG assessment. And they did a lot of community engagement, partnership with NGOs, trying to understand quantitative data on the expectations of the people in that area. And feedback, committees were formed. And let me give you the outcome. What happened was they did rainwater harvesting. They put up a wastewater treatment plant. They even set up an emission control technology. All of this was done, and 50% jobs were kept for the local people. Now, how will you bring this to a financial KPI or a balance? It's very difficult. As Shalini said, it's a long-term investment that you do in your brand. No wonder today Unilever is doing very well, right? And I'm not just giving one name, be it the Tatas or the Godrej or so many other companies. They really connect with people on the ground. That's what ESG assessment helps them to bring that, back to the culture, back to the DNA, and back to your leadership. So I think it's hard to look at it from a quarterly numbers and KPIs and balance scorecard. I don't think that's the way to look at it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We are out of time. The panel members will be available over dinner. So please connect with them. I've given you conversation starters so that you can certainly use. Thank you for a very insightful session.